countries such as Bermuda in the insurance sector, isn't it perfectly reasonable that the EU should offer the UK the same?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and given also that on day one we'll have exactly the same rules, we will not be rule takers, we'll have the right to diverge in the future, but on day one you can absolutely see why the EU will be looking very carefully at the equivalence decision.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker, thank you. In the South Lakes, we have 3,000 local families waiting for a council home. And yet the government's own Migration Advisory Committee says the government's plan for visas and migrant pay will see an 8% reduction in the construction workforce. So will the Minister explain who is going to build the homes that families in the South Lakes so desperately need?
Well, the right honourable gentleman will know that under this government so far since 2010, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of homes being built. I think last year was the highest number of homes being built in all but one of the last 30 years. And when it comes to building more of those homes, then of course we do need enough workers in the industry, and that's exactly what our points-based system is about, making sure that it focuses on those areas where we need most support.
Catherine Fletcher.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer this question together with question 4 and question 19. Better transport is central to our ambition to level up and spread opportunity across the United Kingdom, which is why the Chancellor will be unveiling the National Infrastructure Strategy alongside his budget, and it will set out further details of our plan to increase capital investment to record levels and transform the UK's infrastructure.
Fletcher.
South of Preston, there's only a single crossing of the River Ribble and a single-track bridge crossing the River Douglas, creating massive choke points for the residents and workers of Lancashire. Will my right honourable friend consider additional bridges at these crossing points, which are strategically important for the whole of Lancashire as well as those in South Ribble?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of relieving congestion for improving day-to-day quality of life and driving economic growth. I'm pleased her constituency benefited from a £30 million investment to do just this last year, but there is more we can always do, and I would urge her to consider the Department for Transportation's Pinch Points Fund.
Speaker, places like Melton Mowbray in my constituency have very low unemployment thanks to a thriving food manufacturing sector and the business-friendly policies of this government. But we need to see wages rise locally. What investments has his department made to make sure local councils can provide the transport needed, in particular buses, so people can get to work and revitalise our high streets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to hear about the economic growth happening in my honourable friend's constituency. I know her local councils are a key part in driving that. I'm pleased to say the government announced today a £5 billion package to support local transport infrastructure like buses and cycleways, alongside our existing £3.6 billion Towns Fund, which I know 16 different places across the East Midlands have benefited from.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Andy Street's vision to revolutionise our transport networks in the West Midlands, coupled with the continuation of the HS2 project, will hugely benefit my constituents in West Bromwich East, especially those in Great Barr, with the expansion of the Midland Metro system in the vision that Andy set out just last week. Will he look at what further funding can be made available to level up our transport infrastructure in the West Midlands ahead of the budget next month?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of local intracity transportation. Obviously, the Prime Minister will be making a statement later about national infrastructure, but I would say to her, we heard what Andy said.
issue in my constituency. So please, if there's any additional funding for infrastructure, don't forget Wales.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to tell my honourable friend this government is committed to improving transport infrastructure across the United Kingdom. Obviously, some matters are devolved. When it comes to rail infrastructure, National Rail Network Rail has a £48 billion plan. I'd be happy to hear with him about the specific projects as he's interested in taking up with them.
Speaker, reports over the weekend that Bradford City Centre stop is to be dropped from the Northern Powerhouse rail route are extremely concerning. And given the importance of NPR to any improved transport infrastructure, can the Minister confirm here today that the government's preferred route still includes Bradford?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm a passionate believer in improving east-west connectivity across the north. I'm pleased to say I met the leader of Bradford City Council just the other week. I think Bradford has an exciting future as one of the youngest cities, not just in the UK, but in the country. I believe the plans that NPR have put forward include Bradford. We're happy to look at those, and indeed TfN are actively at the moment engaging with local stakeholders on the various routes for improving connectivity between Manchester and Leeds, and that includes Bradford City Centre.
Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, what progress has been made on the promised feasibility study of a bridge between Northern Ireland and Scotland as promised by the Prime Minister? And more immediately, has there been any discussions with the Scottish Government on the upgrading of the A75, an important road link to Northern Ireland and important to the economic corridor in the southwest of Scotland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is passionate about improving connectivity across the United Kingdom. My honourable friend will know this is one particular project he's expressed interest in, and he can assume that we are busy at work fleshing out what it might look like.
John Howell.
Question number 3.
The Clean Growth Strategy sets out our proposals for decarbonising all sectors of the UK economy through the course of the 2020s. This year, the Government will be setting out further detail on plans to reduce emissions in key sectors such as transport, energy and buildings, as well as publishing our Net Zero review.
John Howell.
The next UN climate conference is the perfect opportunity to be able to set out exactly what we are doing to keep our emissions down to net zero by 2050. Could he please assure me that he has committed this government to doing all he can to achieve that? And will he also assure me that he is delivering the green jobs that come with that as well?
Well, I'm a passionate believer in the net zero agenda, and I believe that it's perfectly congruent with economic growth. COP26 presents a huge opportunity both for the UK but also globally. We are already a leader in tackling climate change, having reduced the emissions intensity of our economy faster than any other G20 country. We'll be doing more at budget.
George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that as part of the drive towards zero emissions, there was a recent announcement about the bringing forward the phasing out of diesel, petrol and hybrid vehicles by 2035. What assessment has he made about the economic and fiscal impact of doing so, and in particular the loss of jobs that will happen because the industry is in imminent danger of collapse?
Well, we are consulting on the optionality of accelerating the phasing out of petrol and diesel cars, because the average lifespan of a vehicle is around 14 years, and if we're therefore to hit our net zero targets by 2050, we need to be sensitive to that. But I can reassure the honourable gentleman we're listening very carefully to the industry on this issue. Just last week I met the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders for a productive conversation on how we can do this in a way which supports their sector.
Anthony Macklin.
Sir. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer this question with question 9. The UK's 5.8 million small businesses play a vital role in our economy. We have lowered the corporation tax from 28% in 2010 to 19%. We've introduced the employment allowance to reduce employers' NICS bill by £3,000 every year. And we've reduced the business rates burden, so more than 675,000 of the smallest businesses pay no rates at all. Last week, members from across this House came together to celebrate our beers, our brewery and our pubs. So I wonder whether or not the Chancellor and his team will raise a glass to our beers and our pubs and our brewery and lower duty on these institutions. The Treasury team love pubs, and we recognise the importance of pubs to the economy and to community life up and down this country. And they provide a place to socialise and drink responsibly. And that's why we've frozen the duty over 6 of the last 7 years, and that means a pint of beer is 14 pence cheaper than it would have been otherwise, and that we're now at a 30-year low in real terms.
Sir David Evans.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that small businesses are the driver of growth and prosperity across our country, but too many struggle because of high business rates. Can the Minister confirm that this Conservative government will extend the retail discount of 50% late this year, giving a much-needed tax cut to millions of small businesses on the high streets across our country?
I'm delighted to confirm to my right honourable friend that the retail discount to 50% will operate from the 1st of April this year. We will also extend that discount to include cinemas and music venues, extend the duration of the local newspaper's office space discount, and introduce an additional discount for pubs worth £1,000 for up to 18,000 pubs up and down the country.
Most of businesses in my constituency are micro businesses employing 1 or 2 people. The biggest problem they have is larger firms paying their bills on time. What measures can be put into place to ensure larger companies are paying the smaller companies on time so they can continue with their businesses?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right to raise this point. That's why we have the Small Business Commissioner. We're working very closely with trade bodies to ensure best practice takes place in this, and this is a Bayes lead, but we're working very closely with them to see that more progress is made on this vital matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, small businesses will be affected by the news given over the weekend that there won't be frictionless trade, and that this government, in its insistence on not sticking to a level playing field, will affect small businesses whether they import or export. So what is the Chancellor of the Exchequer and his department doing to prepare small businesses for the inevitable changes this will bring?
Well, we're working very closely with the representative organisations to understand those concerns, but it's important that we move forward, secure a free trade agreement and give certainty to small businesses. The principal concern they have is that have had over the last year is a lack of progress, and it's now our responsibility to remove that uncertainty and get to a clear position in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 6.
Mr. Speaker, infrastructure is a top priority for the government. That is why we are publishing the National Infrastructure Strategy alongside the budget. It will set out further details of the government's plan to increase investment to transform the UK's infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend, the Chancellor's commitment to vital national infrastructure. But does he agree with me that bespoke local infrastructure projects benefit the national infrastructure network by increasing connectivity, such as the much-needed Chicken Hall Lane road link in Eastleigh, which my constituents have been waiting for over 20 years for?
My honourable friend is right. Local transport is the backbone of our community, and that's why hopefully he'll welcome the announcement we've made today on buses and cycling, a £5 billion new package on local transport. Also, there's the £150 million fund for smaller projects to deal with congestion hotspots, and I would be pleased to consider the Chicken Hall Link Road at the next available competition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Blaenau Gwent needs investment in the Ebervale to Cardiff train line for extra services. The Shared Prosperity Fund could be a crucial route to providing this. When will the fund be ready to support infrastructure projects in our eastern valleys?
Well, the honourable gentleman, as we transition from sort of EU structural funds to the Shared Prosperity Fund, it will be important that we set out exactly that's how it's going to work. In reference to his own question, it means that the Welsh Government will have to work closely with us to see how we can use it for infrastructure projects in Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to heavy usage by HGVs, Surrey is sometimes called the pothole capital of England. What steps is the department making to invest in tackling potholes nationally, which I'm very keen to see in East Surrey?
Well, my honourable friend raised a very important issue that affects so many communities. All our constituents would raise the number of potholes being unbearable nowadays, and that is why we have already made clear in our manifesto that we will have the largest fund ever put in place by any government to tackle potholes, and there will be more details at the budget.
Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to ask this question together with question 17, or whatever it may now be. The review of the off-payroll working rules reform was announced on the 7th of January 2020.
The reform is due to be extended to medium and large-sized organisations in all sectors from the 6th of April. It's determining whether any further steps can be taken to ensure smooth and successful implementation, and a series of roundtables with stakeholders have already been conducted. The review will conclude by mid-February 2020, after which recommendations will be made public.
Jessica Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the rollout of IR35 in the private sector fast approaching, there's already concern that companies are making blanket determinations, forcing genuine contractors into contracts that tax them as employees but with no employment rights. Ahead of the protest here tomorrow, why don't the government listen, pause with the process and work with the industry to do a proper review?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She may be aware we've already made a small but important change to the rollout as a result of the review. We're not aware of blanket determinations being made, although it must be said that there are many firms that are choosing to acknowledge disguised employment and bring those contractors in-house. If she's aware of it, she'll also be aware that there are various routes by which determinations can be challenged, including, if necessary, a submission under the income tax self-assessment process for a final determination.
Agree.
We all want to crack down on tax avoidance, but legitimate contractors in my constituency face uncertainty about their status and tax liability thanks to unclear HMRC guidance, CEST's unreliability, and the firms they work for are cancelling contracts because of the confusion. What is the Minister doing to address their concerns?
Well, again, I thank the Honourable Lady. The answer is we're conducting a review to make sure it's as smooth as possible. We recognise there's difficulty here. It's been going for 18 months since the original reform of status determination was announced. In that process, we've had a consultation, we've had draft legislation, we've had further discussions and consultation, and we're having a further review now to make sure it's properly and smoothly rolled out.
Swain.
As to how many of the pillars of taxation did the Economic Affairs Committee in the other place judge the 2010 legislation on the loan charge to have failed?
Well, I can only... We have a question about the loan charge later on, Mr. Speaker, so I'll look forward to his further question then. The answer is he can answer the number of pillars because I'm sure he's scrutinised the committee's hearings very carefully. What I can tell him is that the fundamental principle of tax is that tax should be properly collected from people who owe it and who may be avoiding it, and that is what this is designed to do.
Martin Day.
Thank you. Number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for a question about e-publications. I see, by the way, Mr. Speaker, your predecessor, Speaker Burko's book, aptly named Unspeakable, the Autobiography, has just been published. Apparently it's an online bestseller in the rather surprising, slightly niche category of blues musician biographies. Unlike many other e-books, this book is considerably cheaper than the book itself. Whether that will remain so is not clear. I don't know if you've had a chance to peruse the work, Mr. Speaker, but if you have, I'm sure you'll agree that no reader would have that appetite to read it affected by a reduction in tax. What this brings out is that it is a commercial decision as to how e-books are priced, and it is far from clear that changing the tax would affect that decision.
I thank the Minister for his entertaining answer. We on these benches are very disappointed that the last government refused to back our demands to remove VAT from electronic publications. So, with the budget only a month away, will he consider a change of policy so that, at the very least, online children's books and academic journals can become more affordable?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and of course he's absolutely right that there are benefits associated with extending zero-rate VAT in this area as others. The task for government is to work out what the right thing is to do, all things considered, and all I can say is that we have responded to the Cairncross review in some of the part of this area, and we continue to keep all taxes under review, especially in the lee of a budget.
Michael Fabricant.
While agreeing with the point made by the honourable gentleman for the SNP, does he not find it somewhat ironic that the only way we can reduce VAT to zero rate is through Brexit? Yet they are the very party who wish to remain in the EU, and we would therefore not be able to reduce VAT if that were the case.
Well, I think that's a very telling point, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, and I draw the House's attention also to the parallel issue of sanitary products for women, in which I'm pleased to say we will be able to act after we've left the EU.
Boss.
Question number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The financial health of local authorities remains a priority for this government, and indeed for me personally as a former local government minister. I'm pleased to say that next year's local government finance settlement outlines and will deliver the biggest year-on-year increase in local government spending power for over a decade.
It's been a terrible decade. For over 10 years, Enfield has been significantly underfunded, which has had a huge impact on the provision of local services. The proposed settlement goes nowhere near addressing this shortfall. So will the Minister meet with me
There will be a formal consultation coming later this year, and I would encourage them to input their particular needs if they think those are not adequately captured by the formula today. But I would also say that Enfield in this forthcoming financial year can look forward to an almost 6% cash increase in its spending power available to spend on its residents and its communities.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to the Community Secretary, has the Chief Secretary had any discussions with representatives of Hyndburn, Burnley, Lee, Blackpool South, Colne Valley, Durham North, Keighley, Stoke-on-Trent Central and North, or Workington concerning the adequacy of the fundings of councils covering those constituencies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in my previous role, I had many conversations with councils up and down the country, and indeed in this job I do take representations from people like the Local Government Association, the District Council Network and the Core Cities Consortium, amongst others. But the point is, this will be an evidence-based formula that looks at the various needs of all authorities up and down the country. It's being done in participation and in partnership with independent academics to help arrive at a formula that is fair for every part of this country and every local authority.
Well, clearly those discussions weren't very productive in that case, were they? I can tell honourable members a likely outcome according to the LGA, the Local Government Association, 6.6, 6.6, 6.5, 6.4, 6.2, 10, 10, 9, 4, and I'm not referring to Olympic ice skating marks, Mr. Speaker. It's the additional millions lost, respectively, by the councils of the honourable members I listed. In all, 37 or 70% of the councils of the 50 new Tory MPs are set to lose millions in the government's so-called fair funding formula. Did he mention that to his new colleagues, or is he being too busy keeping his eye on the potential job vacancies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the figures that my right friend or member refers to are pure speculation. The formula hasn't actually been concluded yet, so it's a bit difficult to talk about the conclusions in advance of that. There will be a consultation, and regardless of the type of area that any member in this Parliament represents, rural or urban, north or south, it will be an evidence-based formula. All the various criteria that drive local government spend, whether it is rurality, whether it's deprivation, those are the kinds of things that will be taken into account, and in that process all members will be able to input, and they can have confidence that the final formula that is one that is fair and importantly evidence-based.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasury team will know how difficult it is to get a funding formula to operate for places like the Isle of Scilly, which are remote and sparsely populated. Good work has been done to bring together health and social care under one roof, and I wonder if the Minister could shed more light on how difficult areas like this can be funded in the future.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Chancellor, my honourable friend, the Chancellor, has met with my honourable friend and his local authority recently to discuss this, and indeed I took representation from them in the past. He's absolutely right. Rurality, and in particular in his constituency's case, the particular geographic challenges that poses are something that should be taken into account in the new formula. I'm sure my honourable friend, the local government secretary, will indeed be doing that as he looks at all the representations in the spring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to the Housing Secretary, has my right honourable friend had a chance to speak to the Education Secretary about the pressure on school budgets from the local government pension scheme? In a visit to the excellent Hanley Castle School in my constituency last week, I discovered that actually almost half their payroll is covered by the local government pension scheme, and they're experiencing quite a lot of budget pressure from that.
Mr. Speaker, the pension scheme that local government is fully funded, which is something that means that all local authorities contribute on an annual basis. It's right that that's taken into account when setting annual budgets. I'm pleased to say that the government has outlined a 3-year school settlement, which takes school funding up by £4 billion in real terms over this forthcoming spending period. And those extra resources will allow schools to deal with the pension pressure and also to invest in our classrooms, which is where the money needs to go.
Thank you, Leah.
Mr. Speaker, it was extraordinary to hear the Treasury Minister talk about the biggest year-on-year increase in funding after a decade of major cuts. And he knows, because he can do the maths, that it's nowhere near raking any recompense. The Public Accounts Committee looked in detail at local government spending, and we concluded that in simple terms it was being squeezed massively, particularly for children's social services and adult social services. When will he actually acknowledge that for many of the things that his government is purporting to want to deliver, local government is key, and it needs sustainable and increased funding to make up for the cuts of the previous decade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, local government deserves enormous praise for the hard work that it did, helping restore this country's public finances to a sustainable state. We all know why we were in that situation a decade ago. But we can now look forward with confidence. Local government is benefiting from a very significant increase in spending power this year. She's right to highlight the pressure on social care, which is one of the largest areas of spend, which is why this government has just committed an extra £1 billion in social care grant to help local authorities alleviate that pressure this year and into the future.
Mr. Speaker, we will level up opportunity across the UK to ensure that every region and nation benefits from growth, including through better infrastructure, through public services and investment in skills. And I will set out more details in the budget through the National Infrastructure Strategy.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents are delighted about the government's plans to level up funding across the country. Can my right honourable friend tell me what this will mean for the people of the East Midlands and my constituents in Gedley?
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker. As we level up opportunity in every region, we will make sure, of course, the whole country benefits, including the East Midlands. And this includes, for example, the £3.6 billion Towns Fund that we've already announced with some 16 town deals in the East Midlands. And also, the government is committed to the £250 million growth deal, which is funding for Derby, Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire area, which will include projects such as the Gedling Access Road.
It's beyond parody. The reality is 10 years of Tory rule and the 5 richest families in this country own more wealth than 13 million of us put together. 14 million of us live in poverty. 2 out of 3 of those are in working households. Childcare, transport, the cost of rent hold millions back. So will the Chancellor accept some tests for his budget? Will he cut child poverty? Will he cut homelessness? Will he end the need for food banks? Will his budget match his words? The hell it will.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me tell the Honourable Lady what we've seen under 10 years of Tory rule after Labour's Great Recession. After Labour's Great Recession, we've had 9 consecutive years of growth, an economy that is at least 17% bigger than it was in 2010, 3.9 million jobs created. You would think a party that calls itself the Labour Party would welcome that. Unemployment at its lowest level for 45 years, and according to the IMF, an economy that will grow faster this year than Italy, than Japan, than France and Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SMEs are critical to economic opportunity and would undoubtedly benefit from greater access to business finance, yet challenger banks suffer from the same capital requirements as larger banks, despite the fact they don't present the same systemic risk. Would my right honourable friend say what he might be able to do to change this situation?
I can tell my honourable friend this is something that I've discussed with regulators, and he's right about the general point he's made about challenger banks and the risks they may or may not represent. And it is right that we take a fresh look at this, because having more competition in the banking sector is a good thing, especially for SMEs.
Yeah. Jim McMahon.
12, sir.
I recognise the positive impact that cooperatives and mutuals make across all sectors of the economy, including retail, agriculture and financial services. No assessment has been made of the amount of tax paid by cooperative and mutual businesses. However, I note the APPG's report last year found that mutuals generate over £130 billion to benefit the wider economy each year.
Thank you. It's a matter of fact that the three largest co-ops in this country paid more tax than Facebook, Amazon and Cafe Nero combined. So not only are they creating jobs, they're also paying fairly into the exchequer as well. Will the Minister meet with me and representatives from the co-op and mutual sector to discuss how we can expand that part of the economy to make sure that Britain can thrive in an inclusive way?
Yes, I will. With 7,000 co-ops across the United Kingdom employing nearly 250,000 people, I've had numerous meetings over the last 2 years with representatives from co-ops and mutuals. We had a mutuals workshop last July. I'm very happy to meet with him, discuss the report of, I think, Manchester Mutuals recently, and see what we can do together going forward.
Mike Wood.
Mr Deputy Speaker, perhaps I should declare an interest as... sorry, Mr Speaker, it's been so long. Apologies, Mr Speaker. Perhaps I should start by declaring an interest as a member of the Mid-Counties Cooperative. But will my honourable friend consider broadening the eligibility for social investment tax relief so that more mutuals and social enterprises can deliver excellent services and outstanding social value?
Well, I always listen very carefully to what my honourable friend says, and I think the best way forward would be for me to meet with him to discuss his specific proposals and see what can be done.
Suma Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Neither the law nor HMRC made clear...
Minister.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to answer this question together with question number 20. Of the estimated 50,000 individuals affected by the loan charge, the government currently estimates that more than 30,000 people will benefit from these changes. This also includes about 11,000 people who will be taken out of paying altogether. In addition, individuals who have settled or who are settling their tax liability with HMRC will be out of scope of the charge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Neither the law nor HMRC made clear the position regarding loans and self-employed people. Indeed, it was not until 2016 that it was announced that a change would be made to the law to include self-employed. And others who didn't even find out for a year or two afterwards, like my constituent Drew Salotra. So will he not do the obvious thing and get rid of all retrospection and apply the loan charge from when the law was clear and applied to all those, including the self-employed, and in addition to clamp down on those who promoted these disguised remuneration schemes in the first place?
Well, of course, she's absolutely right that it's important to crack down on the promoters, and we're bringing forward a package at budget about how to do that. But the point she wider raises is wrong. This is not a retroactive measure, and it's also true that the government has been, to some extent, vindicated by Samius Morse, who found that the loan charge was an appropriate way to respond to tax avoidance, and after detailed argumentation, suggested a date in December 2010 as the correct date from which to date the legality of it.
Boris Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But even 2010 is, of course, 10 years ago. So if the law was clear then, as the report suggests, why didn't HMRC act then? Surely they have the responsibility in this matter.
Well, of course, HMRC did pursue these cases quite vigorously, and what Sir Amias found, on the basis of, as I say, quite a detailed consideration, was that the law was clear then, and therefore HMRC rightly believed that the law being clear, people would be, as it were, accommodating it. But, of course, they've been pursuing people who have been avoiding tax through disguised remuneration schemes for many years before that, and they will continue to do so for those that have been carved out by the loan charge review.
Ruth Gadley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Treasury have accepted some of Sir Amias Morse's recommendations, but there are confusion about some of those. My constituent got caught in a disguised remuneration scheme before 2010, and yet he still is not convinced that he's in the clear and still has that fear hanging over him. What does the Minister say about that?
Well, the Honourable Lady is quite wrong. We accepted all but one of Sir Amias's recommendations, and the one we didn't accept was because the issue he raised was being very well handled already within the system. Of course, if she has a specific concern, she's very welcome to raise it with tax commissioners or indeed with me, although on an anonymised basis I obviously can't deal with the specifics.
Back.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 16. Here.
Chancellor.
Thank you. You ain't no deputy, Mr Speaker. Increasing productivity is the best way to boost wages and improve living standards. We have worked hard to build a stronger, fairer economy, dealing with the deficit, helping people into work and cutting taxes for families and businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The link between R&D investment and increasing in productivity is well recognised. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to encourage more private sector investment in R&D to help Britain become a leader in the fourth industrial revolution?
Can I first just very quickly thank my honourable friend for all the work that he's done to put the UK at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution. And he's right to raise the importance of R&D. That's why we're committed to invest an additional $7 billion in research and development by 2021-22, which is the largest increase in 40 years. And he'll know that in our manifesto, we committed to go even further.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. But the people who work in the lowest productive, least paid jobs, though they're often highly skilled, are women working in care, in retail or in hospitality. So where is the Chancellor of the Exchequer's productivity plan for the women in our country?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be pleased to know that, first of all, we have more women in employment than ever before in our history. The gender pay gap is at its lowest level ever recorded, but she's right. We do need to do more, and as we invest more, whether it's in infrastructure, it's in skills, that will help. But the other thing that will help too is our new points-based immigration system, because, too often we have had some businesses that would look to take labour from abroad if it is unskilled and cut the wages of people locally, and we have to put an end to that too.
Come to topical, Stephen Crabb.
Sir.
Mr. Speaker, we have ended the uncertainty over our departure from the European Union, and we stand at the beginning of a new chapter. I do know that the future is bright as we level up our country and we unleash Britain's potential. Mr. Speaker, we have confirmed that 31 million people will get a tax cut in April. And at the budget on March the 11th, I will continue to lay the foundations for a decade of renewal. We will be setting out our plans for an infrastructure revolution, for better investment in our most important asset of all as well, which is our human capital.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend reaffirm that when we talk about levelling up, we are indeed talking about levelling up the whole United Kingdom, all regions, all nations? And can I encourage him to show real determination to make sure that the devolved nations also see and feel the benefit of his ambitious infrastructure proposals?
I can absolutely confirm that to my right honourable friend. We are blessed, Mr. Speaker, with talent throughout our country. Wherever we look, we have talent. Our country is oozing with talent, including, of course, in Wales, and we've just seen a demonstration of that talent. And we need to make sure there is much more opportunity, and that means investment in infrastructure, in skills, and keeping a dynamic, competitive economy.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last month, we've seen the Financial Times predicting the Chancellor will miss his balanced budget target, and today we've seen zero growth in the economy. At the same time, Mr. Dominic Cummings has demanded cuts in taxes and massive spending commitments. So the Chancellor has resorted to floating a possible raid on middle-income pensions, a mansion tax, once described as Marxist, and a 5% cuts round to find some money to pay for Mr. Cummings' demands. And yet, Mr. Speaker, in the real world out there are victims. The victims of Wonga, the payday loan company, were told a fortnight ago that they will receive less than 5% of the compensation they're owed. Will the Chancellor take a break from his arm wrestling with Mr. Cummings and bring forward measures to fully compensate the Wonga victims?
Mr. Speaker, it seems that I think I have to correct myself. When I said there's talent throughout the country everywhere, I don't think that includes the party opposite, as we've just seen. Mr. Speaker, there's all sorts of speculation about the budget. I'm not going to respond to that, but what the right honourable gentleman will know is that when the budget is published, it will be published alongside a report by the independent OBR, and those are the figures that are going to matter, not those that are speculated on in the press. And when it comes to growth, he will know that, yes, there's been a fall in global growth, but still Britain is forecast to grow by the IMF faster this year than France, Germany, Italy and Japan.
I asked about Wonga.
He did.
On the basis of that answer, I can see why Number 10 nicknamed him Chino, Chancellor in name only. Wonga is just one example of the recent scandals in the finance sector. We've seen scandals of closet tracking last year, London Capital and Finance, Woodford Investments, Lycra Mobile's tax avoidance, a Tory party donor, NFC Health's misreporting today, large-scale money laundering, and audit failure after audit failure. Regulation of the finance sector, I say it again, is clearly failing. And now here we have the risk to jobs of the tardiness of a post-Brexit settlement. So let me put it to the Chancellor. In the white paper he's promised today, can he assure me it will address the failure of regulation, the culture of recklessness and abuse that has developed in some sections of the city, in addition to the risks from Brexit, so that we can plan a long-term stable future for our finance sector?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do remember not that long ago the Shadow Chancellor stood here and said that he wanted to be known as the People's Chancellor. I think the people had a very different idea to him. And when it comes to his question about high-cost credit, when I was last in the Treasury as Economic Secretary, that was the first time any government had introduced some proper regulation around high-cost credit. It is something that we keep under review, and that is why, as we present our white paper in the future, we will be looking to see what more we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many in financial services will warmly have welcomed the Chancellor's remarks in the papers yesterday about equivalence arrangements, but does he agree with me that the real value to those arrangements is the length of the revocation period? And will he therefore press for a minimum of a year and preferably 3-year revocation notices? Chancellor.
Yes, I agree with my honourable friend, and an equivalence arrangement, done properly, would require a period of stability to be agreed, and that is exactly what we're working on with our European friends.
Funding for coal mining ended in 2012, but it carries on in oil and gas, as we saw at the recent Africa summit and also in the lobbying for the Petrofac oil refinery in Bahrain. So when is the Chancellor going to end funding for fossil fuel projects and take the action that is needed to tackle the climate crisis?
The UK take our climate commitments exceptionally seriously, and obviously here in the UK we've pledged to end the use of unabated coal by 2025. Clearly, we do want to make sure that applies to our work overseas as well. That's something that the government as a whole takes very seriously. That's something, obviously, that's subject to ongoing ministerial discussion. We're determined to make sure that, obviously, we support the right initiatives across the world.
Thank you very much. Over the last few weeks, I've met with a number of businesses in the Mearn Valley whose growth is being held back by poor internet connectivity. What funding exists to help businesses in rural areas boost their productivity and growth by improving their broadband?
My honourable friend is right to raise this, Mr. Speaker. The government already has in place the gigabyte broadband voucher scheme and the rural gigabyte connectivity scheme, which is available to SMEs with support of up to £3,500 per company. But she will also be pleased to know that the government has committed £5 billion to invest in new infrastructure to make sure that every part of our country has the best broadband possible.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Chancellor ensure in the budget in March that the automotive manufacturing sector gets the support it requires? He will know that there was a decline last year of 14% in our manufacturing production, big hit to the Treasury, and make sure the support's in place to ensure a transition from fossil fuels like diesel-powered units, make sure they can still produce those vehicles in good numbers, and switch and support the switch to EV.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Just tomorrow I'm attending a round table at 11 Downing Street with the advanced manufacturing industry. This is something we're determined, obviously, to take their views into account as we make this transition. We're supporting the industry through initiatives such as the Advanced Propulsion Centre and the Faraday Battery Challenge. We're determined, obviously, to make sure that the sector evolves in a way which boosts their growth prospects as we decarbonise.
Emmy Moore.
Mr. Speaker, last year my town of Southport benefited from a £25 million town deal. Can I ask my right honourable friend what more he is doing to help other towns right up and down the country to also level up?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to it, as the Chancellor said, levelling up across the country. Part of that is our town deals to help revitalise our high streets, but also, as the Prime Minister will talk about later, we unveiled a £5 billion package to improve local connectivity, bus and cycle lanes, to improve both the quality of life in local towns, but also economic opportunity.
Abdul Khan.
Mr. Speaker, back in September last year, standing at that dispatch box, the Chancellor declared austerity was at an end. But just last month, he demanded each government department cut 5% of their budget. Hardly a glowing endorsement of the end of austerity. Will the Chancellor now admit this government never had any intention of ending austerity or easing the pain felt by millions around the country?
With respect, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman is very confused between cutting spending and tackling waste. And we know that the previous Labour government was good at neither of those. You're overspending and loads of waste. It is right that as a government we look carefully at every single pound that is spent and make sure it is done so appropriately.
Mr. Speaker, creditor enforcement action can greatly exacerbate the problems that people going through mental health crises can experience. Can I commend the Chancellor and the Economic Secretary for the Breathing Space initiative, which will help to ease the pressure on them and so many more?
I thank my right honourable friend for his comments. I'm very pleased that the Breathing Space scheme is moving forward. We published the impact assessment last week. 700,000 people will benefit from it next year when it comes into force, and that number will rise to 1 million in the following year.
Depending which briefing to which of today's newspapers was accurate, the infrastructure announcement will fund a grand total of either 250 or 1,000 miles of new designated cycleway. That's compared with the 1,800 being provided by the Labour Mayor in Manchester alone. So how can a small city like Exeter hope to get any help, resources or the powers it needs to deliver on the cycling infrastructure it desperately wants to do?
Well, I can tell the right honourable gentleman the announcement today was £5 billion of fresh funding for local transport, that's buses and cycling, and when it comes to cycling, something that we all want to see made easier, more easier to access for all constituents, there will be 250 miles of new dedicated cycle track.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know this government is committed to renewing and improving our national infrastructure. However, those improvements have to represent value for money. Can I therefore urge the Chancellor to question both the cost and effectiveness of the current proposals for a new Lower Thames crossing and suggest he re-examines both the business case and the alternative options?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I understand my honourable friend's concerns, and he's right to raise this, and he'll be pleased that the Highways England is conducting a supplementary consultation of the Lower Thames crossing to make sure that any benefits are maximised. The consultation will close on the 25th of March, and then I would look at it carefully, and I would encourage him to have his say.
Question we're up,
As a former teacher, I know that a good education is a key driver to economic opportunities for young people, but sixth forms have been heavily damaged by years of underinvestment. Will the Chancellor commit to implementing the recent recommendation from the Education Select Committee and Ofsted to raise the rate of funding per pupil to at least £4,760 in the next month's budget?
Well, Mr. Speaker, post-16 education and skills is a priority for the Chancellor and this government. I'm pleased to say the recent spending round delivers a £400 million increase in funding for post-16 education, which makes it the fastest rise in a decade and means that the per-pupil base rate that she talked about will go up faster than the school's total.
Stride.
My right honourable friend the Chancellor will know that I have written to him about the legal duty that the OBR has to produce two economic forecasts in each financial year, which of course has been complicated by the cancellation of the last budget. So could I ask the Chancellor, my right honourable friend, just to set out for the House the approach that he intends to take and how he will avoid the necessity of having two forecasts very close together saying essentially the same thing?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on being elected as the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. I look forward to working with him and the scrutiny that he will provide, as he is doing right now. The issue about the forecast that the OBR needs to provide is a live one. We will absolutely make sure that the OBR meets its statutory requirements, and I'm pleased that the head of the OBR, Robert Choate, has discussed it with my right honourable friend as well, and I'd be happy to discuss it with him too.
Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor will know the association between productivity, economic opportunity and regional connectivity, and noting that Flybe is in the news again today, and knowing how important it is to Belfast City Airport in my constituency and regional hubs right throughout this United Kingdom, will he remember those three principles as he charts a course to find a permanent solution for that aviation company?
Yes, of course, I will keep that in mind, and I want to reassure the honourable gentleman that the government is absolutely committed to spreading opportunity throughout the country. That means each of the nations that make up the United Kingdom, and we want to look at all ways that we can improve connectivity.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Goodwin International Training School in my constituency is an exemplar of skills training by a successful modern manufacturer with a world-class reputation. For the less established firms, such as challenger SMEs, what support is on offer to level them up to the Goodwin International standards?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. I had a good meeting with her yesterday, along with fellow Stoke and North Staffordshire MPs. The government is supporting small firms across England through a network of 38 growth hubs, one of which is based on Stoke-on-Trent. In our manifesto, we announced our intention to create a national skills fund. This will help to transform the lives of people who haven't got onto the work ladder and lack qualifications, as well as people who are keen to return to work or to upskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every year, Scotland exports £250 million worth of salmon to the European Union. This week, the Scottish salmon producers expressed a serious concern at the continuing uncertainty of Brexit. What assessment has the Chancellor made of the impact on this vital industry of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster's announcement that as friction-free as possible, trade with the EU means not friction-free at all?
I can assure the honourable gentleman that we are working very closely with the fishing industry, including our salmon producers, to make sure that as we put in place our new free trade agreement, that they will continue to thrive.
We now come to the ministerial statement, and this is on transport infrastructure. I now call the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll make a statement on the transport revolution that we intend to bring about. There are all sorts of reasons, Mr. Speaker, why the city in which we now sit is the most productive region in the whole of Europe. We have the time zone, the language, the agglomeration of talents, and above all, we have a mass transit system that every day conveys millions of people efficiently and affordably with tubes and trains and 8,600 buses into the central activities zone in the morning and out in the evening, like the respiration of some vast undersea salentorate. And as the public transport network has expanded in the last 150 years, it has brought hope and opportunity and job prospects to people growing up in every part of this city and beyond. And it is the ambition of this government to employ that same utensil, fantastic transport infrastructure, to unite and level up across the whole country. And of course, there is far more to do in London, and the present mayor, frankly, needs to be shaken out of his complacency. But there is even more to do across the nation as a whole. Whether you're stuck in a jam on the A303 or on the outskirts of Lincoln, whether you're trying to get from Warrington to Manchester or toiling across the Pennines by rail, you know that this country is being held back by our inadequate infrastructure. And so, in the next few weeks, this government will be setting out more details of the transport revolution, because we all know the potential of transport to change your life and the life of your town or your city. And we know that efficient transport can clean the air and cut pollution and get cars off the road, and we can simultaneously reach our ambition of net zero by 2050, and we can shorten your commute and give you more time with your family and increase productivity, and bring business and investment to left-behind communities. And so that's why we're embarking now on a massive programme of investment in local transport, starting with a record-breaking £5 billion of new investment in buses and bicycles. An investment that will mean bus passengers across the country seeing a dramatic improvement in their daily journeys. More than 4,000 brand new buses on the roads. Zero carbon, British-built buses on the roads of places like Ashfield, Barnstaple, Southampton, Manchester, many more towns and cities besides. More services, including in the evenings and weekends. Simpler, cheaper, and more convenient ticketing. Properly designed priority schemes to speed passengers past the traffic jams. And it's an investment that will also mean cyclists enjoying hundreds of miles of brand new separated lanes with mini Hollands blooming like so many tulips in towns and cities right across the country. And that £5 billion, Mr. Speaker, is just the start. My very good friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will be making a full announcement in this month's budget, and I have no desire to steal his thunder. But I can signal today that we are taking forward transformative investments, improvements from Cornwall to the A1 north of Newcastle, from South Salisbury to South Ribble, from Cheadle to Chiverton, dual carriageways, roundabouts, bypasses, underpasses, and those are just the roads. We have already set out plans to explore new investments in the rail network across the north, developing proposals to reopen the Fleetwood line in Lancashire and the Ashington-Blythe rail line in the north-east, improving track and platform capacity at Middlesbrough Station, installing new signalling at Harrogate, one of North Yorkshire's busiest stations. And further south, I can today announce that we will be upgrading the Bristol East Junction, a major pinch point in the rail network of the southwest that limits access to the Brunel-designed Victorian splendour of Bristol Temple Meads Station. Mr. Speaker, the transport revolution is local because it must be local. We can unite and level up across the country with fantastic local improvements. Better rail, less congested roads, beautiful British-built buses, cleaner, greener, quieter, safer, more frequent. And above all, we can improve the quality of life for people and improve their productivity. We make places more attractive to live in and to invest in. But we cannot make these improvements in isolation from one another, because we'll only be doing half the job. We will not fix the great musculoskeletal problem of UK transport. Yes, we must fix the joint between the knee bone and the thigh bone and the shin bone and the ankle bone. And yes, we must fix the arthritis in the fingers and the toes. But we also have to fix the spine, Mr. Speaker. And our generation faces a historic choice. We can try to get by. We can try to get by with the existing routes from north to south. We can consign the next generation to overcrowding, standing up in the carriageways, or we can have the guts to take a decision. No matter how difficult, unlike the party opposite, by the way, Mr. Speaker, no matter how difficult and how controversial, that will deliver prosperity to every part of the country. 50 minutes off the time to Glasgow. When it comes to advocating HS2, it must be said that the task is not made easier by HS2 Limited, the company concerned. Speaking as a Member of Parliament whose constituency is on the route, I cannot say that HS2 Limited has distinguished itself in the handling of local communities. As everybody knows, the costs forecasts have exploded. But poor management to date has not detracted, in my view, from the fundamental value of the project. The review recently conducted by Douglas Oakervie, copies of which will be placed in the Library of the House, leaves no doubt of the clinching case for high-speed rail. a vast increase in capacity with hundreds of thousands of extra seats, making it much easier for travellers to move up and down our long, narrow country. And that means faster journey times. Not just more capacity, it means faster journey times, extraordinarily fast journey times. Passengers arriving at Birmingham Airport will be able to get to central London by train in 38 minutes, which compares favourably, Mr. Speaker, you will note, with the time it takes to get from Heathrow by taxi, a point I just draw to the attention of the House. But this is not just about getting from London to Birmingham and back. This is about finally making, considerably faster than the Piccadilly line, this is about finally making a rapid connection from the West Midlands to the Northern Powerhouse, to Liverpool, to Manchester, to Leeds, and simultaneously permitting us to go forward with Northern Powerhouse Rail across the Pennines, finally giving the home of the railways the fast connections they need. And none of it makes any sense without HS2. The Infrastructure and Projects Authority considers that this first phase can be delivered for its current projected costs of 35 billion to 45 billion in today's prices. The designs have been improved immeasurably thanks to the tireless contributions of campaigners, including my right honourable friend, the member for Chesham and Amersham. I don't think she's in her place. And if we start now, services could be running by the end of the decade. So today, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet has given high-speed rail the green signal. We are going to get this done. And to ensure that we do so without further blowouts on either cost or schedule, we are today taking decisive action to restore discipline to the programme. I will be appointing a minister whose full-time job will be to oversee the project. A new ministerial oversight group will be tasked with taking strategic decisions about it. There will be changes to the way HS2 is managed. We will, in line with Mr. Okavy's recommendations, be interrogating the current costs to identify where savings can be made in Phase 1 without the costs and delays that would be associated with a detailed redesign, and so that the company can focus solely on getting Phases 1 and 2A built on something approaching time and budget. I will be creating new delivery arrangements for both the grossly behind schedule Euston terminus and Phase 2B of the wider project. But before those designs are finalised and legislation introduced, we will also present an integrated plan for rail in the north. Informed by an assessment from the National Infrastructure Commission, it will, in line with the findings of the Okavy review, look at how we can best design and integrate rail investments across the north, including Northern Powerhouse Rail between Leeds and Manchester. And I've just spoken to the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who has warmly welcomed this project, which I committed to supporting, by the way, I seem to remember, during my first days in office. I want the plan to identify the most effective design and sequencing of all relevant investments in the north. For example, with many in the north crying out for better east-west links instead of improved north-south ones, which you've heard many times in this House, some have suggested delaying or even cancelling HS2 in order to get Northern Powerhouse Rail done more quickly. But I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the House, this is not an either-or proposition. Both are needed, and both will be built as quickly and as cost-effectively as possible. And to make sure that happens, we will, working closely with northern leaders, explore options for creating a new delivery vehicle for Northern Powerhouse Rail. And we will start treating HS2 north of Birmingham, Northern Powerhouse Rail and other local rail improvements as part of one integrated master plan, High Speed North. Because something has to change, Mr. Speaker. And those who deny this, those who say we should simply build 2B and Northern Powerhouse Rail, according to the plans currently on the table, are effectively condemning the North to get nothing for 20 years. And that would be intolerable Mr. Speaker. So as we draw up this plan, we are not asking whether it's phase 2B or not 2B. That is not the question, Mr. Speaker. The question is how we can bring a transport revolution to the north sooner. And together this revolution in transport, in local and national transport, has the potential to be truly transformative for the entire country. And yes, it is ambitious, but ambition, frankly, is what we have lacked for far too long. 2 centuries ago, our ancestors would have been content with, could have been content with breeding faster horses. Instead, they invented the railways. They created the transport network on which the United Kingdom rose to economic preeminence. They looked to the future of transport and they made it happen. And today, it is our duty to do the same. Let us bring about a future where high-speed trains glide between our great cities, where electric buses convey us cleanly around our towns, where self-driving cars roam along roads that are free of the congestion that causes so much pollution, and where a new generation of cyclists pedal safely and happily to school and work in tree-dappled sunlight on their own network of fully segregated cycle paths. This government, as we did in London, this government will deliver a new anatomy of British transport, a revolution in this nation's public transport provision, and a sign to the world that in the 21st century, this United Kingdom still has the vision to dream big dreams and the courage to bring those dreams about, and I commend this statement.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. Once again, we see the government taking ideas from the Labour Party adopting our language, but falling very long way short on the substance of it. This, Mr. Speaker, is a government that's unwilling to make the scale of investment needed to revive parts of this country that have been decimated by successive Conservative governments. It's a government that's proved itself unable to manage infrastructure projects properly and incapable of keeping a lid on the costs.
Absolutely.
Today's piecemeal announcements don't add up to a serious plan to rebalance the economy or to tackle the serious climate emergency that we all face. They don't even come close, Mr. Speaker, to repairing the damage done by a decade of Tory government. Well, it's true, you know it. The Prime Minister laments our inadequate infrastructure. Yet it's his party that's been starving the country of investment over the last 10 years, resulting in the worst regional inequality in Europe. Today, the Prime Minister is selling his announcement as a prize for parts of the Midlands and the North. I simply tell him this. People in those regions to whom he promised so much in the general election are going to be sorely disappointed when they see what actually happens. Take HS2, for example. The Labour Party supports HS2 as a means to boost regional economies and reducing climate emissions. It's essential for boosting rail capacity and freeing up other lines for increased freight use, etc. But we don't see why the government should get a slap on the back for announcing it's going ahead. After all, it's only because of the abject failure of successive Conservative governments to keep on top of the costs that the project's future was put in doubt in the first place. Today's proposed boardroom shake-up comes far too late to avoid the public having to fork out tens of billions more than was forecast in the first place. It's money that's already been wasted because of the incompetence of this Tory government and its predecessors. The leaked Oakervie review is going to come out later, apparently, was correct to say that HS2 must be fully integrated as part of the modern railway system. It must extend to the great northern cities, linking up with Northern Powerhouse Rail and eventually to Scotland to end the need for domestic flying in this country at the earliest possible opportunity. So, we are concerned that the links to Manchester and Leeds are now under review and could, reportedly be even downgraded. HS2 must be developed with more sensitivity to local communities and much more sensitivity to the environmental impact, particularly on modern and ancient woodlands across this country. And if it's to have public support, the fares on HS2 must be affordable and comparable with the rest of the fare system on the railway network. Can the Prime Minister tell us where the trains will be built? Will those jobs and training be done in this country? But also, Mr. Speaker, what about other parts of the country, like, for example, the far southwest? When will the Prime Minister match the £2.5 billion commitment to upgrade the Great Western Main Line as our only train line into the southwest? We need to have better connectivity beyond Bristol to Devon and Cornwall. We believe that the case is now unanswerable that our railways, Mr. Speaker, should be publicly owned and publicly run to improve the service and cut fares by 33%. Does the Prime Minister recognise that too many people are simply priced off the railways? The average commuter is now paying £3,067 for their season ticket, £873 more than when the Conservatives came into office in 2010. Why won't the Prime Minister cut the cost of travelling? Why should people in Britain have to pay so much for expensive fares, more expensive than any other comparable country? Mr. Speaker, when I first raised the question of buses at Prime Minister's Question Time, I was ridiculed by many Tory MPs and many in our media. From the look of the front pages of our papers today, those same quarters now regard the focus on buses as a political masterstroke. Well, I take the credit for it, it's fine. But in reality, Mr. Speaker, what the government have said today about buses is frankly woeful. They've cherry-picked policies from the Labour manifesto, but underfunded them. It doesn't make up for the deep cuts since 2010. Funding for buses has fallen by £645 million a year in real terms since 2010. 3,300 routes have either been cut or withdrawn, and fares have soared at 2.5 times that of average wages. It's councils that keep bus routes open. We need long-term funding for our local authorities that have suffered such severe cuts and now face a further £8 billion black hole over this Parliament because of underfunding. And the government is still refusing to give all councils the powers to improve local bus services and the option of public ownership of their services. On cycling, all he's offering actually is 250 miles of cycle routes. Our manifesto promised 3,300 miles of cycle routes all across the country. Again, it's just plain inadequate by this government. Underinvestment by the Conservatives has created problems that they are forced to acknowledge, but they simply aren't serious about fixing them. Regional inequality is going to be solved by... Is regional equality going to be solved by 10 free ports? Isn't this just a gimmick, really creating storage spaces for the super-rich to dodge taxes and launder money? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is clearly fond of announcing big, shiny projects, like the scheme to build a bridge over the Irish Sea. Why not go the whole hog and make it a garden bridge, connected to an airport in the sea? It stands as much chance of actually being built as any of those failed projects by the former Mayor of London put forward. Or, Mr. Speaker, why not a cable car between Scotland and Northern Ireland? Or better still, a giant zip wire. The Prime Minister could be the first to try it out. The saddest thing, Mr. Speaker, about today's announcement is the high likelihood that so much of it won't be delivered. With the Prime Minister demanding 5% cuts in the very departments that are supposed to carry these policies out, I fear that those communities that desperately need investment and new infrastructure are going to be let down when today's headlines become yesterday's news and they find that nothing has changed?
Sorry. Just help the House. I'm expecting to run this to around 140. So some members may not get in, but if we all help each other, it will be much nearer to getting everyone in. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thought the right honourable gentleman did a manful attempt there to conceal his fundamental agreement with what we're doing, and you know he raised some interesting points. Actually, we're doing a transport revolution across the whole of the southwest, not only investing in the seawall at Dawlish on the railways, but we'll of course be upgrading the roads, the A303 through the southwest. We'll be doing improvements in Wales, and I think it's high time, by the way, that the Bryn Glas tunnels were unblocked. We encouraged the Labour government in Wales to do that. It's HS2, of course, don't forget, brings 50 minutes off the journey time to Glasgow. Every part of this country benefits. As for fares, I would just remind him that fares rose twice as fast under the Labour government. And the whole point of the honourable gentleman is trying to interrupt me from a sedentary position. I would remind him the whole point of putting in another 200,000 seats in capacity is that you thereby drive down prices for the consumer. It's about competition. Mr. Speaker, he made a heroic attempt to cavil and disagree with what is fundamentally a wonderful project for this country. He even tried to dislike our bus plans. I don't know quite. No, he claimed them for himself. Mr. Speaker, I'll take that. The Leader of the Opposition, as far as I understand the position, actively supports the announcement of the government today, and I congratulate him on that.
You, Merriman.
The additional £5 billion for buses and cycle links is greatly welcomed. Last year, the Transport Select Committee called for additional funding in buses and a buses strategy, both of which are coming to fruition. How will the Prime Minister ensure that the money allocated to local authorities for these projects is spent by local authorities for these projects? Will it be ring-fenced? And if not, how will we really ensure that we are levelling up for our public transport system?
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend for the work he does for his community, and I can assure him we will ensure that when money is allocated for buses or for cycling projects, it is spent on buses and cycling projects.
Stand it. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the Prime Minister for advance copy of the statement. Let me be mindful of one reality. No number of Prime Ministerial vanity projects will ever heal the economic damage and the damage to connectivity which this Tory Brexit will inflict. In terms of the HS2 announcement, enhanced rail infrastructure is obviously welcome, despite the indecision and the waste that has been synonymous with this project. We will wait and see if the Prime Minister is capable of getting this decision through his own party and past his own chief advisor. However, if the Prime Minister is truly committed to rail connectivity across these islands, will he engage with the Scottish Government to improve rail links from Scotland to the major cities of the north of England, such as Manchester, Newcastle and beyond? Will he also explore collaboration on the extension of the Borders rail line, and what resources will be provided? The Prime Minister may talk about his priorities of one nation. We know what nation he's talking about, and, Mr. Speaker, it certainly doesn't include the Scottish nation. Can I further ask, given his previous opposition to the Barnett formula and his party's repeated failure to fully implement it, can the Prime Minister confirm if all of the spending that he is determined to engage in will be subject to Barnett consequentials? Yes or no? I welcome the fact that the UK Government is following the lead of the Scottish Government, who announced a £500 million bus infrastructure programme last September. Mr. Speaker, given the Prime Minister's previous association with buses, can the Prime Minister reassure the House that false advertisements will be banned from the new bus fleet? And finally, on the bridge. This is a Prime Minister that couldn't even build a bridge across the Thames. He'll therefore have to forgive those of us that are sceptical that he can build one over the 20-mile expanse of the North Sea. Will the Prime Minister therefore provide the estimated $20 billion for his project to the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive so they can spend those money on our own priorities?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the right honourable gentleman that we will, of course, collaborate with the Scottish Government on projects that I think will be of massive benefit for the whole of our United Kingdom. And on his substantive question about Barnet consequentials, of course will be Barnet consequentials as far as the bus is concerned. I'm afraid I'm not following him in building on all the... as far as his plan to build a bridge across the North Sea, Mr. Speaker, I think he needs to look at the geography of the United Kingdom again. Indeed, the only obstacle standing in the way of HS2 is the crackpot SNP plans to put an economic border between England and Scotland, break up the United Kingdom and have a border at Berwick.
Andrew Mitchell.
My right honourable friends, a comprehensive announcement today will be very widely welcomed across the West Midlands and in Birmingham, and nowhere more so than in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield. Will he today pay tribute to the superb leadership marshalling the arguments of our West Midlands Mayor Andy Street and the case that he has put which will underwrite our economic prosperity for the future?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. I salute the work of Andy Street, his vision for transport in the West Midlands, and that will be supported and encouraged and fomented by HS2.
Red Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the announcements as far as HS2 and the integration into HS3 is concerned. Yep. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that his statement could also be improved and bring more immediate jobs to the north of England if, as well as building HS2 from London to the north, we also started building HS2 from the north to the south? And finally, for real ambition, would he not agree that HS2 should go to Scotland, which would help to unite the two countries?
Mr. Speaker, we'll certainly get on with building Phase 2A immediately, but I can tell him that HS2 already does go to Scotland. That's one of the great advantages of this project.
Michael Fabricant.
The Prime Minister will understand that Andy Street and I tend to talk about soft furnishings as it tends to avoid argument, because I'm less than enthusiastic about the route of HS2, which neither connects with Eurostar nor with Birmingham New Street or indeed with St Pancras. But I'm delighted to hear that the Prime Minister has said that the organisation of HS1 Limited will be revised. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it's very, very important that, as HS2 now is going ahead, that we also compensate well those people in my constituency and his who will be affected by HS2?
Mr. Speaker, the short answer to that is, of course.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The confirmation that the full HS2 route has been given the go-ahead is welcome news, and there's a strong case for building the Birmingham to East Midlands part early. But if this project is to deliver on its potential for our region, we need assurances that the Phase 2B bill will receive royal assent in this Parliament, that it won't be delayed further or downgraded to cut costs. Will he give those assurances today?
Yeah, of course, Mr. Speaker, we are committed to Phase 2B, but I think she would appreciate that now, given what's happened in the past 10 years with Phase 1, it is vital that we use this inflection point to make sure that the taxpayer gets maximum value as we proceed.
Victoria Prentice.
Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady for Cheshireman Amersham, who is recovering from a major operation, has asked me to thank the volunteers and donors from all over the nation who have fought against HS2 over the past 11 years. The last 3 years have given us a few lessons in what gracious defeat looks like. And while I remain worried by the environmental, financial and governance issues of this project, I really do wish it all the best. I was particularly pleased to hear what the Prime Minister said about the northern section and the speed by which he needs to deliver that, and about buses and bikes. Can I ask the Prime Minister one ask, Mr. Speaker? Holistic approach to blight. If it's impossible to regrow ancient trees or to get rid of congestion where there is congestion, can we please compensate communities by, for example, building their local hospital?
Mr. Speaker, what we can certainly do is ensure that where there is environmental damage, and we must say, of course, that there will be effects on woodlands. There we must restore them. We're planting 7 million trees, which is many more than will be destroyed.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While on balance, I welcome the news that HS2 has been given the go-ahead for the capacity gains which will benefit the North West region and for the construction and rail supply firms in my constituency, who I hope will receive a fair shot at winning contracts associated with the project. My constituents in Culture, Croft, Risley and Hollins Green in particular will be looking for assurances that the unnecessary Goulburn Spur will be removed from the proposed route. This is an issue that transcending party affiliations, local MPs are in agreement on. Will the Prime Minister give those assurances?
Mr. Speaker, I've heard representations on the Goulburn Spur from many sides of the House, from many people in this House, and we will certainly be looking at that.
Sir Graham Brady.
Can I welcome the increased priority for Northern Powerhouse Rail and the link from Manchester to Leeds in particular? But can I also ask my right honourable friend to ensure an urgent review of parts of the route for 2B, including the Goulburn Spur, entirely unnecessary and likely to cost over £1 billion, completely wasted money, but also to look at the fact that the station for Manchester Airport, absurdly, isn't at Manchester Airport. It will be built on ancient woodland in my constituency at Davenport Green instead.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, both about the Goulburn Spur and Manchester Airport, and we will certainly be looking at both those.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Key to cutting carbon emissions and tackling climate change is cutting domestic flights and moving people onto our railways. That's why the HS2 announcement is to be welcomed, and building a third runway at Heathrow is an act of environmental vandalism. Will the Prime Minister now prove his credentials on climate change, make good his promise of lying down in front of the bulldozers, or, far more simply, just cancel the third runway?
Mr. Speaker, I see no bulldozers at present, nor no immediate prospect of them arriving.
Polly Latham.
Local authorities have limited resources to deliver their new local cycling walking infrastructure plan. Would my right honourable friend the Prime Minister support the delivery of parts of those plans through appropriate local charities such as the Derwent Valley Trust in Derbyshire that are capable of implementing key sections of the network?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think it would be very important that we collaborate with appropriate delivery vehicles such as the charity that she mentions.
Meg Hillier.
Speaker, it's good to have certainty over HS2, but the Prime Minister has unveiled a raft of big spending projects. Where's the money going to come from?
Mr. Speaker, the money is coming through the hard work and effort of the British people, and this government will manage our finances prudently and ensure that the economy is not wrecked as the last Labour government succeeded in doing.
HS2 will connect with the Elizabeth line and Heathrow Airport at Old Oak Common Station, a station that will become every bit as famous as Victoria or Waterloo. But Old Oak Common will neither be old nor common. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should have a name in keeping with its importance and iconic, maybe after the first woman Prime Minister of our country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is a brilliant idea. Let's try that one out on the Mayor of London.
I asked the Prime Minister about the prospects for change in relation to the eastern leg of 2B. The original HS2 vision was to serve and regenerate our towns, But in South Yorkshire, our towns are facing all of the pain and none or very little of the gain. And can I commend to him the HS North concept come up with by local campaigners, they got there first, which actually has a plan, an integrated plan, to help towns like Doncaster and Mexborough.
Mr. Speaker, he makes a very good point on behalf of Doncaster, and we are certainly looking at the HS plan that he mentions.
Sir William Cash.
The Prime Minister knows how bitterly disappointed my constituents in Staffordshire will be about the decision. Could I simply ask him, when he's considering the question of review, to include Phase 2A from Birmingham to Crewe and the rest of that part of the constituency which is going to be so badly affected, because we need to have a proper link with Handsacre to make sure that Stoke and Stafford are properly serviced. Does he understand that, and will he do everything to make sure that we're kept in the review?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. On Handsacre, he has my full support.
Hilary Benn.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement, but given what he has said about reviewing Phase 2B, could he tell the people of Leeds when he now expects the new HS2 station to open?
Mr. Speaker, we'll get it going as soon as possible.
Jones.
Speaker, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on that statement? He's so right when he says the economy of the North needs both east-west and north-south connectivity. Does he agree with me that the challenge we face in transport is not, as sometimes articulated, between local or national investment? What we need is both.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and you can't have the gains of one without the other. Local productivity won't be boosted unless we improve national productivity up the spine of this country. That's what HS2 is all about.
Lucy Powell.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly welcome the announcement today on HS2, but let's be clear, the question mark was written by the Prime Minister and his government, and it shouldn't have been written at all. But under the terms of the review we're now seeing, can he ensure that the full benefits of NPR and HS2 are fully integrated at Manchester Piccadilly Station and that no stone is left unturned in making sure that that can happen?
Yes, I certainly can, Mr. Speaker.
Eddie Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, infrastructure costs are frequently driven up by unforeseen ground conditions. Can the Prime Minister remind the House of the commitment by this government to increase spending on research and development, such as Birmingham University, who are working on quantum technology to map those ground conditions?
I thank my honourable friend. He's entirely right, and HS2's investment will not just drive the construction sector, it will drive the economy across this country, including higher education.
Jonathan Edwards.
The last time I looked at a map, London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds were all in England. So can the Prime Minister explain why does Scotland and Northern Ireland get 100% Barnett rating from HS2 whilst Wales gets 0%?
Well, of course, as he knows very well, if he looks at the map, that North Wales will indeed benefit from the Crewe link. But I might say to the representative from Wales that actually it's high time that the Welsh Labour government got on and delivered the M4 bypass at the Bringlass tunnels, and we in this government will get on. If they won't do it, we will.
Andrew Bridgen.
HS2 is unloved, unwanted and has been grossly mismanaged. It very adversely affects my constituents. Does the Prime Minister appreciate my and my constituents' concerns that this could well be an albatross around this government and the country's neck moving forward? And doesn't it set the bar very low for the future delivery of infrastructure projects on time and on budget by all future governments?
Mr. Speaker, every great infrastructure project is opposed by the people at this stage. The M25 had 39 separate planning. The Treasury was against the M25. I seem to remember delivering the Olympics, not to speak of Crossrail, with the Treasury trying to get rid of Crossrail. Every single infrastructure project is opposed at this critical moment. We've got to have the guts, the foresight to drive it through.
Jim Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In London, and thanks to the Hopper fare of Sadiq Khan, I can travel across the entire Greater London area on 2 buses up to 30 miles for £1.50. In Newcastle, £1.50 will barely get me 4 stops up the West Road. Yeah. Will this funding bring north-eastern bus fares into line with those in London, or is this all bluff and bluster signifying nothing?
I'd remind the honourable lady that bus ridership has fallen catastrophically under the current Labour Mayor because of his mismanagement of the system. Crime has risen precipitately, and we will ensure not only that we drive down crime in spite of what the current Labour Mayor is doing, but we have fantastic, cheaper, greener, cleaner buses across the country.
Mary Robinson.
Speaker, I welcome this statement and particularly the decision to start treating HS2 Northern Powerhouse Rail under the local rail improvements as one integrated master plan, High Speed North. As this is brought forward and the design stage is brought to us, how are we going to ensure that local business leaders and communities are included in what's best for their area locally and in terms of this high-speed rail project?
Mr. Speaker, we'll make sure that businesses and communities are fully involved in the preparations for High Speed North.
Sir George Hammer.
The devil, Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister well knows, is in the detail. Could I cautiously, though, welcome the announcement on HS2 and the announcement that about linking up the northern powerhouse great cities, during the course of which the Prime Minister referred to and Liverpool. Could he give us some indication as to what he meant by that?
Mr. Speaker, that's at the next stage of the consultation.
Neil Clark.
The government has ended uncertainty for those who want HS2, but will my right honourable friend the Prime Minister also end uncertainty for my constituents in Stafford who have waited years for their houses to be bought and for compensation to be paid?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we'll do just that. And I apologise to everybody for the uncertainty that's been involved.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the commitment both to HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail, but in neither case did the Prime Minister mention Sheffield. Would he therefore confirm that the Sheffield Loop will go ahead as planned on HS2 and that the Northern Powerhouse Rail improvements are not just about Manchester to Leeds, but Manchester to Sheffield as well?
Mr. Speaker, we're proceeding with the whole of the HS2 plan, but as the House will appreciate, given what has gone before, it is right that we interrogate the methods and the costs as we go forward with phase 2B.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend knows I don't agree with the decision he's reached on HS2, but I respect the fact it was a difficult decision, and I'm grateful to him for listening to both sides of the argument before he made it. Now that it is made, isn't it right that HS2 Limited need to not just compensate more swiftly and more fairly than they have, but also communicate better than they have with those affected by the line? And will he make that specifically part of the remit of the new HS2 Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I think my right honourable friend is absolutely right. I think the record of HS2 in engaging and in communicating with local people has been woeful, and we will ensure that changes from now.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said it was the SNP that were standing in the way of high-speed rail to Scotland. In fact, it's his government that are doing that. So can you tell us precisely what year will the line be extended to Scotland?
Well, I'm delighted in the first place that he supports high-speed rail, that he supports HS2, and as I say, the only obstacle to that great project is the deranged SNP plan to install an economic barrier between the UK, including an immigration barrier, for all we know, between the UK and between England and Scotland.
Amanda Soloway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am delighted by the statement today. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that not only does it support the growth in the North, but the Midlands as well, including the constituents and businesses of Derby North?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her support. And if you could just go to the Midlands, and you can see the investment already flooding in as a result of HS2. Let's turbocharge that now.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of funny in a way to see the Prime Minister come here to gleefully re-announce a project that he himself and his office tried to put a stop to. But whilst he's in train set building mode, can I draw his attention to the Wrexham to Bidston line that would connect North Wales and Liverpool? And will he put some extra investment in there so that we can speed up improvements?
We will certainly examine very carefully the proposal that the honourable lady makes and whether it qualifies under our £1.5 billion beaching plan.
Craig Whittaker.
Friend knows the Calder Valley
has been hit again with the third most devastating flood in 7.5 years. Getting across the Pennines at the best of times is a struggle, let alone when you've been flooded. So the news about Northern Powerhouse Rail is fabulous news for us in the Calder Valley.
Hear, hear.
But can my honourable friend assure the House and members that we won't wait for HS2B to be determined before we start Northern Powerhouse Rail?
No, my honourable friend, well, first of all, I extend my commiserations to all the people of Calder Valley who've experienced flooding. We all know how traumatic a flood can be. But I can assure him that we will certainly allow no delay in pushing ahead with all the branches of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The HS2 project, albeit somewhat shambolically handled, is great news for England, but it shows once again the contempt with which this government holds the people of Wales. The entire budget for electrifying the main line to Swansea would be less than 1% of the vast sums that are being talked about today. So will the Prime Minister today commit to electrifying the main line to Swansea, or will he continue to hold the people of Wales in contempt?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, as I've just said to another honourable gentleman, the North Wales will benefit from the line to Crewe, and as for the line, we already have electrified the line to Cardiff. We already have electrified the line to Cardiff, and I urge him to get on to his friends in the Welsh Labour government and tell them to stop. They squandered £144 million on a study for the bypass of the M4, which they then decided not to do.
Stephen Hammond. Speaker, can I warmly welcome what my right honourable friend has said today, particularly the announcement of HS2 and the review of the governance arrangements. But can he confirm that he will also use this as an opportunity to embed the skills we need to deliver that infrastructure and open academies such as the Tunnelling Academy he opened during the Crossrail construction period?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I remember well working with my right honourable friend on that project and many others. This will drive jobs and apprenticeships for young people for a generation to come.
Andrew Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome, to use the Prime Minister's own words, his investment in the skeleton of the UK economy, the thigh bone, the knee bone, the ankle bone, but he has forgotten about the red hand of Ulster, which appears to be detached from his plan. Could he outline for us what procurement opportunities and what project opportunities there will be for Northern Ireland, including a commitment to a bridge between Northern Ireland and the UK, which would improve the sinews of the arm and the attachment of the hand to the rest of the body?
And I want to say that the honourable gentleman's characteristic optimism is in marked contrast to the negativity that we heard from the leader of the opposition. Of course, there will be opportunities for procurement in Northern Ireland and indeed elsewhere, and buses spring to mind.
Rachel McLean.
Mr. Speaker, Redditch is only a short hop away from HS2 terminus in Birmingham, so we welcome today's announcement. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that because my constituents have the highest rate of going to work by bus, Redditch is the perfect candidate for Britain's first all-electric bus town?
What a brilliant idea, Mr. Speaker.
Mike Marm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is welcomed, if not delayed, news, in particular for Manchester and Greater Manchester more widely. Can we ensure, though, that the Metro mayors and the council leaders are hardwired into the review, but also, in the way that's already been suggested, we do consider also starting at Manchester and meeting in the middle to make sure that we get the benefits early on, particularly for education, schools and jobs in my town?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I can say that we will indeed be working with the Metro mayors and already are consulting them on exactly that.
Andrew Percy.
We've had the fluffy end of the lollipop for too long in the North on transport funding, so I absolutely am made up by this decision on HS2 and HS3, and I support my honourable friend in Doncaster North's comments too. Can I ask him also, though, to look at the Operator Service Option Fund for underutilised line? There are just 2 services on the Goole-Sneath-Leeds line every day. That's not enough to allow the people of Leeds to come and enjoy Goole. So can he please look at that and ensure that we make these underutilised lines better used?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I'd be only too happy to look in detail at the Goole-Leeds line to see what we can do to assist. We'll suck it and see, as they say.
Mr. McKinnell.
Speaker, Newcastle and the North East need this infrastructure investment in both HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail without any further delay. So can I make a very immediately deliverable improvement to our national infrastructure that will ensure the North East and Newcastle are NPR and HS2 ready by investing in our East Coast main line, which needs urgent infrastructure investment between York and Newcastle.
She makes an excellent point, and we are indeed upgrading the digital signalling on the East Coast main line.
Mark Palsy.
The Prime Minister spoke about the spine of our rail network, and that's currently provided by the West Coast Main Line, and the upgrade that received a few years ago led to many businesses being attracted to Rugby. What reassurance can he provide to them that with HS2 bypassing Rugby, we will continue to retain fast services on a well-maintained railway?
I've looked at this very issue. I thank my honourable friend. I've looked at this very issue, and I'm convinced that it will continue. The existing capacity will continue to be extremely important, and will continue to drive jobs and investment in Rugby, where he and I think, opened a fantastic new electric taxi factory.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite going under my house, HS2 will reduce journey times from Manchester Airport in my constituency to London from 2 hours 24 minutes to 59 minutes, opening up a plethora of opportunities for the poor people of the South East, for the great city of Manchester. The Prime Minister's dodged the question, Mr. Speaker, from my friend from Oldham and from Blakely and Broughton. If he wants to level up and have a northern powerhouse, why doesn't he start building the line from Manchester down?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're building Northern Powerhouse Rail as fast as we possibly can, but he will appreciate that that project is not in a state of the readiness of the Birmingham to London route.
But do we realise more benefits for towns like Winsford in my constituency by integrating Northern Powerhouse Rail, the conventional rail network and HS2? And can my right honourable friend confirm that the Cheshire salt mines and the threat of sinkholes will be considered as part of the next review?
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly confirm that the threat of sinkholes from the Cheshire salt mines will be considered as part of the review.
Ruth Cummins.
I welcome the announcement that the northern section of HS2 will go ahead because, crucially, it will be integrated with NPR. As the Prime Minister said, this country has been held back by inadequate infrastructure. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that Northern Powerhouse Rail must include a city centre stop in Bradford?
I thank her for the representation she makes on behalf of Bradford. I see exactly the point that she makes. We'll be consulting on that issue very shortly.
To Kieran Mullen.
I welcome the announcement today. The Prime Minister has well and truly swept the leaves off the line of transport infrastructure investment in this country. I know businesses in Crewe and Nantwich will benefit locally, not jobs and businesses in London, but locally in Crewe and Nantwich. When it comes to bus investment, can we ensure that local residents get a really strong voice in deciding where these new buses go and how often they go there?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, it's vital that the expansion of local bus services should meet local demand. In my experience, there's no shortage of local demand in most parts of the country.
Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HS2 is a dire reflection on this government's environmental credentials, with the destruction of 100 ancient woodlands and a miserably small modal shift of just 5% of passengers who would otherwise fly or drive. Indeed, the government's own figures show that HS2 does not cut carbon emissions. So if it is to go ahead, then surely it should be required to meet, at the very least, the European average for high-speed rail modal shift, which is 15% for cars and 30% for planes. Why doesn't it?
Mr. Speaker, we've just announced the biggest ever package in history for electric, for zero-carbon buses and possibly hydrogen buses as well. And HS2 is the most low-carbon, most efficient way of getting around this country. I think that will nothing please them.
My right honourable friend, can I congratulate him on actually grasping the nettle and building the infrastructure in the north. It's really welcome. It delivers on the manifesto promises. Part of the problem with the rising costs in Leeds is because of the incompetence of Leeds City Council and a Labour leader who, quite frankly, couldn't organise an event at one of the local breweries, putting this station in a totally inappropriate place. Could I ask my right honourable friend, as part of the review, to look properly at where the station is located and make sure that, as part of the review, he takes account of being able to use existing rail routes routes and infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, we will be making sure as we go forward, and there's going to be a review, I must be clear with the House, we will be going forward with the whole programme, but we will be ensuring that we get proper value and proper political leadership and grip of the whole programme.
Horace.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. For 4 decades, the East Midlands economy has been losing skilled work, and it's caused extraordinary damage to our communities. HS2 is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reverse this decline and to add tens and tens of thousands of skilled jobs to our community. The Prime Minister has taken a difficult but very welcome decision. Can he reassure East Midlands people that there won't be any unnecessary delay to HS2B and that Midlands Engine Rail will be woven into the scheme as well?
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Particularly welcome the Northern Powerhouse Rail connection with HS2, but could I also ask him to look at the procurement process and make sure that it's our UK-based companies like Hitachi Rail in my Sedgefield constituency that get a real chance at getting the business out of this, and can it be done as quickly as possible so that they have an opportunity to plan the procurement?
I want to thank my honourable friend. He has lobbied me personally several times on this very issue, and I can assure him that the plant in question and the jobs in question will be uppermost in our minds.
Stephen Flynn.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. At the last count, HS2 was projected to cost the City of Aberdeen £220 million. Based upon that figure, would the Prime Minister agree that HS2 will be an economic disaster for my city?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, HS2 will shorten journey times across the whole of the United Kingdom, including and particularly Scotland, and indeed, as I said earlier on, there will be Barnet consequentials following from the fantastic announcements we've made today about buses and other modes of transport.
Croft.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your statement and your vision to power up the North through transport. Historically, Scunthorpe steel has been used for many national infrastructure projects, such as HMS2 Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. Does he agree with me that we should be using our world-class steel, such as the steel we produce in Scunthorpe, for projects such as this?
Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the workers of British Steel and what they do. Most of our train tracks come from British Steel, whether in Scunthorpe or elsewhere, and we will do our utmost, notwithstanding the difficulties that plant currently faces, we will do our utmost to ensure that remains the case in the future.
Mr. Speaker, when we were first talking about HS2 10 years ago, we were not talking about a climate emergency. Given the landscape has changed in that respect, surely the government should be significantly investing, much more than being proposed today, behind regional, sub-regional transport systems, buses and cycle routes, on the level that the French and Continentals are doing.
Mr. Speaker, I think I can say without fear of contradiction, I've built more cycle lanes than anybody else in this House. But you know, even what I did, not always popular, but what I did is nothing compared to what we are about to do. The investment we are about to make in buses is absolutely colossal, and I'm surprised that he finds grounds for criticism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome my honourable friend's attention to the spine of the country, but will he apply his orthopaedic talents to what should be the muscular limb that connects London to Hastings, which it will take longer to get to than the hour it will take to get to Manchester in future?
My right honourable friend makes an extremely good point, and I will certainly examine the London to Hastings route. I don't know which part of the anatomy it should be, but it is vital to our nation's prosperity, whatever it is.
Chris Brown.
Is the Prime Minister seriously suggesting that there will not be a single extra penny as a result of today's announcements for Wales? Before he gives me any bluster about anything else, the truth of the matter is they promised that they were going to electrify the line all the way to Swansea. They said that by 2017 the Valley's lines to my constituency would be electrified. None of that came to pass. All we want is a new railway line in the Ronde de Var and to open the tunnel from Blindcombe to Blind-Gwynby. Will he promise that today?
Mr. Speaker, as I tell the House already, we've electrify the line up to Cardiff. And when it comes to tunnels, the Welsh, it's not a widely known fact, Mr. Speaker, the Welsh Labour government, which he supports, which spent £144 million on a study about whether or not to open the Bringlass tunnels, open those tunnels, open the nostrils, unblock the nostrils of the Welsh dragon, Mr. Speaker.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the statement, and particularly my right honourable friend's commitment to a more convenient ticketing system. Many of my constituents commute into London 3 or 4 days a week for a better work-life balance, but find they have no choice but to pay the cost of a full-time season ticket. So can I urge him to ensure that the current trial of part-time season tickets is rolled out nationwide, so we have a ticket system that suits the modern-day reality of our flexible labour force?
My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, assures me that that is indeed his intention.
Emma Hardy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had 10 years of rail downgrades in Hull, from cancelling electrification to older tracks taking longer to arrive at their destination. And while I would like to welcome Northern Powerhouse Rail, I have to say, Prime Minister, I'm slightly disappointed that whenever you mention Northern Powerhouse Rail, you mention it between Leeds and Manchester, when we all know it begins in Hull. So I would like from now on the Prime Minister to talk about Northern Powerhouse Rail as being from Hull, and also to tell me when are we going to see the benefits in my constituency.
Mr. Speaker, the road to Hull is paved with good intentions, and we intend to build it. We will make sure that we have Hull as fully as part of our vision for high-speed north, and I'm sure her contribution will be warmly welcomed.
Miriam Cates.
I thank my honourable friend for his announcement, and I agree that we need both buses and trains to connect our communities. But can he reassure my constituents in Penistone and Stocksbridge, which has many rural areas, that investment in buses will benefit our rural towns and villages and not just our big cities?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that is indeed the point of the investment in buses, because everybody knows, from talking to our constituents, that a decent, reliable bus route can be absolutely transformative of your life and the prospects of your kids. So we will be doing it across the country.
Andy Slaughter.
Speaker, with Birmingham Airport 30 minutes from Old Oak, we won't need a third runway at Heathrow. I'm sure that he will agree. But is HS2 going to terminate at Old Oak for 3 years while Euston is still under construction, as the press are reporting? And if so, what will he do about the disruption and overcrowding at Old Oak? It's already the biggest development and interchange site, and is very happy with its historic name, by the way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his support for the name Old Oak Common. We will make sure that we take control properly of the management of that fantastic project. There is huge potential for success at Old Oak, and indeed it presents a potential link, of course, between the Great West Line and HS2, and we will ensure also that we take control properly of what's happening at Euston, which I think he would agree has been a shambles, and we have a special purpose vehicle established to get the maximum value for the taxpayer from that project.
Simon Hall.
Speaker, I welcome entirely the statement of my right honourable friend. Anybody who's interested in increasing productivity in global Britain could not fail to do so. In response to the question that he was just a moment or so ago asked, can I ask him to take into account with regards to the rural provision for buses? Social mobility in our rural areas really does need a boost. These buses can actually help achieve that. When taking these funding decisions, can rural sparsity be taken into account as one of the triggers?
Yes, of course. Rural need and rural sparsity will certainly be taken into account, as we will take into account the needs of all towns and communities. And it's not only that these buses will help people to get to work or to wherever they do, but of course what they do is they give businesses the certainty and confidence that they can invest in that town in the knowledge that they will have people who are able to commute easily.
Kate Green.
Welcome to today's announcements both on rail and on buses. And in relation to buses in Greater Manchester, could we have an urgent decision now on funding for the Clean Freight and Clean Bus funds?
Mr. Speaker, these will be the cleanest, greenest buses this country has ever seen, but we will certainly be making use of the Clean Bus Fund.
Greg Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I urge my right honourable friend, and indeed anybody that seeks to celebrate the HS2 decision, to keep central in their mind the blight that it will bring to communities up and down the route, not just on the landscape, but people's lives. Throughout the enabling works so far, people have been left in severe financial hardship. Can we actually have an independent body with real power to scrutinise every decision that HS2 Limited makes?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is entirely right in what he says, and I speak as an MP for a seat on the route where, like his constituency, thousands of people have faced confusion and uncertainty about HS2, and it is vital that people are properly compensated, properly treated, and that's why the Construction Commission will be looking at making sure that everybody is treated fairly.
Alison Toulis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish environmental journalist Rob Edwards has been warning since 1995 about the munitions dumps by the MOD in Beaufort's Dyke, the deepest point in the North Channel of the Irish Sea and exactly on the route of the Prime Minister's latest fantasy bridge. Will he instead abandon this project and give the money instead to the Northern Irish and the Scottish governments directly so that we can invest in the priorities for Scotland and Northern Ireland rather than his fantasy plans?
Speaker, we will be bringing forward proposals in due course.
Harriet Baldwin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a West Midlands MP, I warmly welcome today's announcement and thank the Prime Minister, the Transport Secretary, and for working with West Midlands Mayor Andy Street. Can he confirm that as we move towards net zero, that this extra capacity on our railways will allow lorries carrying freight to come off our motorways?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. That is one of the many advantages of the proposals before the House today.
Rupert Hutt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a nearby West London MP, can I ask the Prime Minister over to my patch, where HS2, Crossrail and Heathrow are already impacting lives, and deliver the much-promised His Ministers will know visit that I've been promised for years now, to see what the reality on the ground of a super development opportunity area looks like for people who tend to be forgotten between historic Euston and countryside beauty.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have fond memories of walking the streets of her constituency and listening to her lobbying me in person, and no doubt that I'll be doing so again all too soon.
Jason McCartney.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me? We now have a wonderful opportunity to win hearts and minds on High Speed North by getting thousands of SMEs involved in procurement, tens of thousands of young apprentices getting trained up, the Huddersfield University Institute of Railway Research doing innovation, and most importantly of all, fully integrating it with Northern Powerhouse Rail, linking the northern cities and my local town of Huddersfield.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend speaks eloquently and passionately for Huddersfield, which is amongst the many towns and cities that will benefit from HS2.
Hope House.
Deputy Speaker, to announce 250 miles of new cycle routes as a big green infrastructure investment is a complete joke. It will only mean a few extra miles per local authority, and we as cyclists know what they look like. So if he agrees that we need many more continuous segregated cycle routes, how can he begin to explain how 250 miles across the country will cut it?
Mr. Speaker, this is just the beginning.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that when it comes to buses and bikes, we're all going Dutch. Will my right honourable friend make sure that rapidly growing areas like Essex and the east of England get our fair share of the funding?
Yes.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker.
Ruth Cadbury.
Mr. Speaker, to double the rate of cycling from 2% to 4% of all trips will, according to government figures, need £5 billion worth of funding at least. So how much of today's announcement of £5 billion for buses and cycling and walking will actually be spent on cycling?
In the first stage, 350 million.
Order. Statement, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I'd like to update the House on the response to the Wuhan coronavirus. I've laid an instrument before the House to confirm the power that we've taken to isolate those at risk of spreading the virus, and if necessary, to keep them isolated as part of our belt and braces approach to protecting the public. The powers are proportionate and will help us slow down transmission of the virus and make it easier for NHS and public health staff to do their jobs. The clinical advice about the risks to the public has not changed and remains moderate. As of today, 8 people in England have tested positive for coronavirus. All are receiving expert care from the NHS, which is well prepared and equipped to deal with this kind of situation. Contact tracing of the first 4 cases has been undertaken rapidly and is now complete, while tracing for the latest 4 cases is ongoing. This contact tracing itself identified